Bullshit. F***ing fake. Trump exploded in Congress as Jasmine Crockett slammed down the Epstein files. 30 for indictments, 60 to lawsuits, and a $22,500 check staring him in the face. The chamber erupted. Protesters outside roared. And then came the most shocking twist. 70 for seconds of frozen silence on live TV. One signature, one scandal, one fearless woes. Is this the moment America finally sees the truth it's been running from? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The heat of noon pressed down on Washington, but the true fire was inside the marble walls of the Capitol. Crowds had gathered on the steps, not in shadow or under floodlights, but under the full glare of the midday sun. Their voices collided in brutal rhythm, justice for victims. Tearing through the air from one side, Trump 2024, pounding back from the other. Tourists were shoved aside, police lines strained, and news choppers circled overhead like vultures waiting for the first crack of blood. America was not watching from the sidelines today. America was inside this storm. Within the chamber, the tension was suffocating. The press gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder, sweat glistening on foreheads, hands gripping recorders as if they were weapons. Staffers avoided eye contact, afraid that a single glance might betray which side of history they stood on. At the long oak table, microphones waited, silent predators ready to amplify the smallest crack in a voice. This wasn't just a hearing. It was an execution ground for reputations, and everyone knew only one of the two figures about to enter would walk out stronger. Then the door opened, and the air shifted. Jasmine Crockett entered not with fanfare, but with force. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, her eyes burning straight ahead. She didn't pause, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the chaos. Every step announced, "This is the moment I was built for." She was more than a congresswoman. She was a prosecutor stepping back into a courtroom, a daughter carrying the weight of silenced women, a soldier of truth dressed not in armor, but in certainty. The murmurs in the room dropped into an expectant hush, the kind of silence that amplifies every heartbeat. Across from her, Donald Trump leaned forward in his chair. His tie hung loose, his face glistened under the bright overhead lights, but the smirk never left his lips. Jim Jordan sat close by, whispering, ready to pounce like a shadow guard. Trump's fingers drummed against the table, slow, taunting, like a boxer tapping the ropes before the first bell. He had stared down prosecutors, judges, impeachment managers. But the flicker in his eyes betrayed something else today. The awareness that the woman walking toward him wasn't here to dance, she was here to break. Jasmine reached the table, and with a single motion, dropped a heavy stack of files bound in crimson tape onto the polished wood. The thud cracked through the chamber like a gavel from a higher court. The cameras snapped, shutters rapid fire like gunshots in the distance, heads turned, breaths held. The letters printed in bold on the front sheet glared across the room like a scarlet brand, Epstein files. Her voice didn't waver, didn't climb. It sliced. These are the truths you swore would stay buried. But today, the whole nation will see them in daylight. The line was not delivered to Trump alone. It was hurled through the cameras, into living rooms, into break rooms, into every home that had waited for someone to speak without fear. Trump leaned forward, lips curling, eyes narrowing, and spat the first word of the fight. Bullshit. And that was the spark, a single insult, but one that ignited the air. Millions of Americans leaned forward at once, because they knew the battle had begun. And before the day ended, secrets inside those files could fracture the country itself. What secret inside these files could shake the nation today? The chamber cracked with the echo of Trump's growl. Bullshit, witch hunt, his voice, dripping with disdain, ricocheted through the microphones and onto millions of screens across America. He leaned back, shoulders squared, lips curling into that old familiar sneer, as if the word alone could erase the stack of files staring him down. The smirk was his armor, but it trembled under the fluorescent glare. Jasmine didn't flinch, her eyes locked on him, sharp as glass. Enough with the theater, she shot back, her tone low but laced with steel. The American people deserve facts, not tantrums. She raised a finger, counting one by one. 34 criminal counts, 62 civil lawsuits. 9.1% inflation under your so-called leadership. These aren't rumors, Mr. Trump. These are numbers carved into the record of your legacy. The words hit like hammer blows, each statistic thudding into the silence, each syllable dragging the smirk further off his face. Outside, the crowd roared like a split nation tearing at its own seams. On the east steps, chants of justice for victims rose like a wave, fists punching skyward. To the west, a storm of Trump 2024 collided back, MAGA banners whipping in the hot wind. Police radios crackled as the line between protest and riot blurred. Helicopter rotors chopped the air above, their shadows flickering across the Capitol dome like vultures circling a battlefield. Inside, the media seized the moment. Headlines flashed across digital tickers: Crockett unleashes, 34 counts, 62 lawsuits. Trump explodes at Epstein hearing. Nation divided. Capitol erupts. Every camera shutter clicked like rapid gunfire, every reporter leaning forward as though the next word might tilt the axis of history. Trump shifted in his chair, leaning closer to the microphone, jaw clenched. Fake numbers, fake cases. All rigged by Democrats who hate America. His voice cracked with defiance, but the volume betrayed something else, a tremor crawling up his throat. Jasmine seized the hesitation like a blade. "You call them fake," she fired back, stepping closer, eyes narrowing. "Then why are grand juries issuing indictments with your name printed in black ink? Why are victims standing in line with sworn affidavits? Why did you settle lawsuits while claiming innocence? If this is a witch hunt, then you're the one lighting the torches." Gasps rippled across the room, the audience at home glued to the feet as the standoff grew hotter, sharper, more dangerous with every exchange. For a moment, the air froze, two figures locked in combat, one armed with denial and fury, the other with numbers and truth. Every heartbeat in the chamber seemed to sync with the millions outside, thudding against ribs, building towards something inevitable. Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her voice lowering into a deadly calm. "You can deny your ties to Epstein. You can deny your indictments, but you cannot deny reality. And when reality arrives, Mr. Trump, it does not knock, it breaks down the door." The chamber erupted again, a frenzy of shouts, flashing cameras, and pounding fists on desks. And across America, a single chilling thought spread like wildfire. If he denies even the basics, what happens when undeniable proof rips through the surface? The chamber still trembled from Jasmine's final strike, but now the cameras shifted outward, splitting screens across the nation. In a small diner in Ohio, truck drivers lean over half-eaten plates of fries, eyes locked on the TV above the counter. In a hospital break room in Atlanta, nurses stood frozen, stethoscopes dangling, coffee forgotten in their hands. In a modest home in Texas, a veteran with medals on his mantle gripped his cane tighter, jaw clenched as he stared at the lev feed. From coast to coast, millions stopped what they were doing, united by one feat, one battle, one question burning louder with each second. Twitter pulsed like a live wire, hashtags detonating in real time, hashtag Epstein files climbing past 1 million mentions in less than 15 minutes, hashtag Crockett vs. Trump spiking with videos clipped from the chamber, every second replayed, slowed, dissected. Headlines blare: Crockett shreds Trump. 70 for seconds that stopped America. The hearing that could break a presidency. In living rooms, classrooms, break rooms, Americans weren't just watching. They were participating, typing, shouting, crying, as though history wasn't being written in Washington, but in their own hands. Back in the chamber, Jasmine stood motionless, hands pressed against the crimson-sealed files, eyes steady, posture unshaken. Trump leaned back, face tight, his knuckles white against the wooden table, lips pressed thin but twitching, as if the weight of every camera was a hand at his throat. He tried to smirk, but the silence around him was deafening. Silence not of peace, but of millions waiting, millions demanding. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, suspended between denial and collapse. Jasmine leaned toward the microphone, her voice low, deliberate, but carrying like a hammer through glass. "Tonight," she declared, every syllable slicing the air, "lies end here." No roar followed, no applause, no eruption, just silence, heavy, tense, crushing. It was the silence of jurors before a verdict, the silence of soldiers before the charge, the silence of a nation teetering on the edge of revelation. And in that silence, cameras cut back to America, to the waitress in Chicago whispering, "She's not scared," to the factory floor in Michigan where workers paused their machines, eyes narrowed. To the crowded bar in New York where chants broke out. Truth, truth. Across the country, people weren't just watching anymore, they were choosing sides, their voices swelling into something larger than the room itself. Trump shifted again, opening his mouth as if to fire back, but stopped. For the first time in years, the man who lived by shouting louder than anyone else seemed unable to find words. And America saw it. They saw the hesitation, the tremor, the flicker of doubt. The silence wasn't empty. It was a countdown, a fuse. A nation holding its breath, waiting for the blast. Will Donald Trump finally crack under the unbearable weight of truth, or will he gamble once more that America is too divided to care? The silence shattered when Jasmine lifted a single page from the thick bundle of files, holding it high so every camera could capture it. The image was grainy but clear, an entry in Jeffrey Epstein's notorious birthday book, a doodle sketched across the margin, and beneath it, a name scrawled in sharp black ink, Donald J. Trump. Gasps tore through the chamber, the press gallery erupting in frantic clicks, reporters shouting over one another to confirm what they were seeing. For the first time all day, Trump's smirk collapsed into a snarl. He shot forward, his palm slamming onto the table, voice exploding through the microphone. Fake, ***ing fake. The vulgarity echoed across LED television, making Ankas stammer. Parents covered children's ears, and millions of viewers leaned closer, hearts hammering. Jasmine didn't flinch. She pivoted, placing the page on the projection screen, the signature magnified 10 feet high. Every stroke, every flourish, every curve now towered over the chamber like a damning shadow. This, she said, voice sharp as glass, is the handwriting of the former president. He denies knowing Epstein, denies any connection, but here is his name in black and white. Written not once, not twice, but recorded in a book designed to catalog his inner circle. Trump pounded the table again, his face blotched red, but the fury only amplified the image behind him. Across the nation, analysts were dragged onto live broadcasts mid-sentence. Handwriting experts split screens with the hearing feed, comparing the curves of the D, to slant of the T, the length of the underline. There are strong similarities, one expert admitted, adjusting his glasses, but without the original, we cannot give a conclusive judgment. That single caveat kept the country teetering, uncertainty feeding suspense, every viewer glued to the possibility that the truth was dangling in front of them, but not yet nailed down. The ambiguity wasn't relief for Trump. It was poison, eroding his denials with every passing second. Inside the chamber, Jasmine pressed forward. Mr. Trump, if this is fabricated, then why was it catalogued in Epstein's estate years before your presidency? Why does it match the signatures on your real estate deals, on your tax filings, on your letters as president? Her words rained down like hammers, each blow timed with the flashes of cameras, each question slicing deeper. Trump shouted back, voice cracking under strain. I never signed that damn book. This is a setup. Everyone knows it, yet the room wasn't hearing certainty. It was hearing desperation. In living rooms, veterans shook their heads, workers muttered under their breath, families whispered about betrayal. Online, hashtags detonated into wildfire. Hashtag Trump signature and hashtag birthday book bombshell surged into trending lists within minutes. Screens replayed the signature side by side with Trump's past autographs. Millions of amateur sleuths conducting their own comparisons, fueling the storm. And as the chamber swayed between outrage and disbelief, Jasmine delivered the nice twist, her voice low but searing. If this signature is real, it is not just ink on paper. It is the collapse of your credibility, Mr. Trump, because a man who lies about the smallest detail cannot be trusted with the fate of a nation. The room froze, the weight of the words pressing down on every soul present. Across America, jaws clenched, eyes narrowed, the question hanging like thunder in the air. If this signature is real, what does it mean for his credibility? And how many more lies are waiting to fall? The chamber rattled with Trump's denials when suddenly Jim Jordan lunged forward, his voice slicing through the tension like a saw. This is nothing but political theater, he barked, jabbing a finger at Jasmine, his face flushed with anger. He leaned into the microphone, pounding his fist on the desk. The American people know what this is, a stage circus, designed to smear President Trump and distract from real issues. His words poured gasoline on the fire, igniting shouts from Republicans pounding their desks in unison. their voices clashing with gasps and jeers from the other side of the room. Jasmine turned her head slowly, her glare cutting through Jordan's performance, but before she could speak, another voice thundered across the hall. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood, her voice steady but vibrating with fury. "This isn't theater. It's accountability," she shouted, silencing the chamber for a brief heartbeat. "We are talking about victims, girls whose lives were stolen, voices drowned out by wealth and power. And every time you call this a circus, you spit on their graves." The weight of her words hung heavy, cameras snapping furiously as the chamber dissolved into chaos once more. Republicans roared back, some standing, some shouting over each other, while Democrats clapped, cheered, and demanded order. The chair's gavel slammed over and over, but the sound was drowned out by the sheer noise of history cracking in real time. Reporters leaned over the railings, shouting questions no one could hear. The spectacle itself became evidence of the divide, not just in that room, but across a nation watching, split in half between rage and vindication. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, smirk sliding back onto his lips as if Jordan's interruption had bought him a reprieve. But the reprieve was fragile. Jasmine leaned forward, gripping her microphone with iron resolve. Her voice didn't rise above the chaos, it cut through it, calm yet thunderous. "Political theater?" she asked, her eyes locked on Jordan, then on Trump. "If exposing 34 indictments, 62 lawsuits, and a signature in Epstein's book is theater, then maybe it's because for too long this chamber has been nothing more than a stage for lies." The chamber fell for a moment into stunned silence before exploding again, louder than before. Outside, the protests intensify. Justice for victims collided with Trump 2024. Until the chants were indistinguishable, just a wall of rage battering against the Capitol walls. Social media roared with hashtags, hashtag accountability now, hashtag not theater, hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. Millions of Americans taking sides in real time. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a national trial conducted in the court of public opinion. As the gavel hammered in vain and the shouting stormed on, the camera zoomed on Jasmine's face. Unflinching, resolute, burning with the weight of those who could no longer speak. Across America, people leaned closer, their own breath caught in the chaos of the chamber. Because deep down they knew the question was no longer about evidence or theater. It was larger, sharper, unavoidable. Is this fight about politics, or is it about the very soul of America itself? Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice thick with indignation, his hands spread wide as if to shield himself from invisible blows. "This is harassment," he thundered, eyes darting from the panel to the cameras. "From day one, they've hunted me, spied on me, fabricated cases to destroy me because they fear me. I'm the victim here, victim of a corrupt system, victim of radical Democrats who can't accept the truth." He paused, letting the words linger like smoke, his gaze scanning the room for sympathy, searching for even the faintest flicker of doubt. His supporters behind him nodded furiously, pounding desks as if to will his narrative into reality. For a brief moment, the chamber wavered. The rhythm of his grievance was familiar, the defiance in his tone practiced, honed from years on rally stages where adoring crowds devour every word. But here, under the blinding lights of a congressional hearing and the piercing eyes of millions watching, the performance rang hollow, echoing off walls already stained with contradiction. Reporters shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, others furiously typing headlines like "Trump plays the victim card again" and "The harassment defense." Jasmine rose slowly, her presence cutting through the manufactured pity like a blade. Her eyes locked on him, not with fury, but with the kind of steady certainty that cannot be shaken. She leaned forward, her tone calm but lethal. "Mr. Trump, lies don't make you a victim. They make you a liability." The line detonated through the chamber, each syllable snapping with precision. Gasps rippled across the room, followed by the relentless clicks of cameras capturing the moment he froze, lips parted, chest heaving, but no immediate retort forming. She pressed on, striking before he could recover. "You claim harassment? 34 indictments weren't conjured from thin air. 62 lawsuits didn't appear because people feared you, they came because people were harmed, contracts were broken, fraud was committed. Victims have names, faces, and sworn testimony, and yet you stand here asking for sympathy, as though the weight of your lies is a crown of thorns you alone must bear." The words lashed out like whips, each fact woven with moral clarity. forcing the audience to see the imbalance between his pleas and the evidence piled against him. Trump shifted in his chair, the bluster dimming, his jaw grinding as Jasmine's words settled. The chamber erupted again, Republicans shouting shame, while Democrats pounded their desks in support. Outside, chants grew louder, the sound of sirens piercing through the noise, the clash between protesters swelling like a living echo of the chaos inside. On social media, hashtags ignited, hashtag victim or villain, hashtag liability Trump, hashtag Crockett strikes back. Jasmine's voice cut through it all, final and sharp. Victims don't write checks for silence. Victims don't erase their names from records. Victims don't hide behind denial. You, Mr. Trump, are no victim. You are the architect of your own downfall, and America will not carry your excuses any longer. The chamber fell into an uneasy hush, a silence laced with disbelief and dawning recognition. Across the nation, hearts raced with the realization that denial has a shelf life, and the clock was ticking. How long can denial stand against mounting evidence before it crumbles under its own weight? The chamber was still vibrating from Jasmine's last strike when she pulled a second document from the crimson-sealed stack. Without a word, she slid it under the projector lens, and in an instant the screens lit up with an image that sent shockwaves through the room. It was a grainy party photo, taken at one of Epstein's infamous gatherings. Two men were caught mid-laughter, one of them a longtime Mar-a-Lago associate, pointing at an oversized novelty check. Across its glossy surface were scrawled the words that made stomachs drop. Fully depreciated woman. Sold to Trump for $22,500. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps tore through the air like glass shattering. Aides covered their mouths. Reporters lunged forward, their fingers hammering at keyboards. Some lawmakers looked away, shaking their heads, while others froze, stunned into silence. Outside the chamber, the chants faltered as protesters watching on screens caught the image in real time, their voices cracking under the weight of what they had just seen. Trump's face flushed crimson, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes darting from the image to the cameras as if searching for a way to erase it. He gripped the microphone, shouting, "This is fake, a disgusting hoax. I never bought anyone. Women throw themselves at me. Everybody knows that." The vulgarity spilled into the air, but his words didn't drown out the picture towering behind him. That photo didn't need context, it needed only a glance to sear into the conscience of every American watching. Jasmine's voice pierced through his fury, cold and precise. "A joke?" she asked, her tone slicing into the silence. "What kind of leader laughs at the commodification of women? What kind of man allows his name to be scribbled on a check that treats human beings like property?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every syllable dripped with condemnation, her questions landing heavier than any accusation. Reporters flooded Twitter with screenshots, the hashtags detonating instantly. Hashtag #250 check, hashtag Epstein photo, hashtag Crockett vs Trump. Television networks ran split screens, the smiling faces in the photo beside Trump's scowl in real time. Analysts whispered that even if the image was framed as a joke, the cruelty was undeniable, the symbolism catastrophic. The country wasn't just watching a scandal unfold, it was watching morality itself placed on trial. The tension rose as Trump slammed the desk again, shouting, "Bullshit. You people are sick, you'll believe anything." But his rage only made the silence of the audience more deafening. People weren't convinced by his volume anymore. They were captivated by the grotesque image burned into their minds. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice soft but carrying like a blade across the chamber. "A man who treats women as disposable does not deserve power. A man whose name is tied to cruelty cannot be trusted with justice." She let the words linger, the air growing heavier with each second. Across America, families watching at home exchanged horrified looks, daughters whispering to mothers, veterans shaking their heads, workers muttering under their breath that this had gone too far. The hearing had shifted. It was no longer about denials or signatures. It was about morality, about decency, about whether the leader of a nation had any soul left to lose. And the question thundered louder than any chant, rattling through every living room, every protest, every heart. What kind of leader laughs at the commodification of women? Trump shot up from his chair, his face boiling crimson, sweat glistening under the overhead lights as the dam finally broke. He gripped the microphone with both hands, knuckles whitening, and bellowed so loud the audio system cracked, "I don't need to buy women, they come to me, they've always come to me." The words exploded through the chamber like shrapnel, cutting through the stunned silence and tearing into every ear, every screen, every living room across the country. His chest heaved, his jaw trembled, and for the first time in hours, the mask of control collapsed into raw, unfiltered rage. Gasps spread through the room, sharp and involuntary. Some aides winced, others buried their faces in their hands, knowing the soundbite was already racing across networks. The press gallery ignited, cameras clicking like automatic fire, reporters shouting into live feeds. Breaking, Trump shouts vulgar defense in Epstein hearing. Screens filled with his distorted face, veins pulsing in his temples, eyes blazing with something that looked less like confidence and more like desperation. Outside the Capitol, the eruption was immediate. Protesters who had been glued to jumbo screens gasped collectively before their shock turned into fury. A chant rose from the east steps, jagged and relentless, hammering against the barricades with every syllable. Shame, shame, shame. It rolled like thunder through the streets of Washington, picked up by voices in the crowd until it sounded less like a protest and more like a verdict. The ground itself seemed to vibrate under the weight of the roar, drowning out even the helicopter rotors circling overhead. Inside, Jasmine stayed seated, her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a line. She didn't interrupt, she didn't need to. The explosion itself was damning. Trump was still shouting, voice cracking as his fury spiraled into chaos. "This is sick, you're sick people. They line up for me. Everybody knows it, ask anyone." His words tumbled into incoherence, the chamber vibrating not with persuasion, but with the spectacle of a man unraveling. Every second he spoke was another nail hammered into his credibility, every syllable a live broadcast of arrogance mistaken for strength. Lawmakers shifted uneasily, some averting their gaze, others openly shaking their heads. The chair slammed the gavel, but the pounding was swallowed by Trump's tirade and the shame. Chants echoing through the walls from outside. It was chaos layered on chaos, a leader screaming for validation, a chamber recoiling in disgust, a nation witnessing what it looked like when power lost its grip on composure. Then came a silence, sudden and suffocating, as Trump's voice cracked one last time and dropped into heavy breathing. His hands shook as he pulled back from the microphone, sweat dripping down his brow. The image projected across the country wasn't one of strength, but of a man cornered, thrashing wildly, unable to control his own fury. And Americans watching couldn't decide what they had just seen: the height of arrogance, or an unintentional confession disguised as rage. Is this arrogance, or is this the slip that reveals the truth he's been running from all along? Screens across America flickered with Trump's outburst, and the country seemed to stop mid-breath. In a crowded diner in Pennsylvania, forks hovered above plates, televisions mounted on the wall replaying his roar. "I don't need to buy women. They come to me." The words rattled through the speakers, and silence swept the room before it fractured into gasps and murmurs. A mother pulled her daughter closer in the booth, whispering, "This is the man who wants power again." In the subway tunnels of New York, commuters packed shoulder to shoulder huddled around glowing phone screens, the chant "Shame, shame." From outside the Capitol echoed through earbuds and feeds, commuters shaking their heads, strangers exchanging looks of disbelief. Social media boiled over. Hashtags surging like waves crashing against a seawall. Hashtag shame on Trump. Hashtag truth for victims. Hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. Clips of Jasmine's unflinching stare beside Trump's crimson-faced tirade racked up millions of views in minutes. For every defense he tried to mount, 10 voices shouted him down online. Memes weaponizing his words into reminders of arrogance unraveling. But it wasn't just digital outrage. In Houston, a group of women gathered in a community center, survivors and advocates of abuse watching the feed together. Tears slid silently down cheeks as Jasmine's words replayed. "Lies don't make you a victim, they make you a liability." Applause broke out in that small room, trembling but fierce, each clap carrying years of pain that finally felt heard. One advocate stepped to the camera of a local news crew, her voice cracking but steady. "For the first time, someone is saying what we've lived. This isn't theater, this is survival." Across the Midwest, factory workers crowded break rooms, steel-toed boots scuffing against concrete floors as televisions above vending machines blasted the hearing. They shook their heads, muttering curses at the screen. their distrust of Washington momentarily replaced by a raw recognition, power mocking the powerless, arrogance exposed in daylight. A veteran in Arizona, medals gleaming faintly on his mantle, stared at the broadcast and whispered, "I didn't fight for this kind of leader." His hand trembled, but his voice carried conviction. By evening, candlelight vigils sparked spontaneously outside courthouses and statehouses. People gathered with signs not printed by parties, but scribbled in urgent handwriting. Truth matters, justice for survivors. Strangers held hands in silence, their faces lit by flames that burned not for politics, but for dignity. The air was heavy with the sense that something larger was breaking open, a reckoning that no spin, no insult, no chant could drown out. Jasmine's composure became the image of the day, steady, unshaken, a woman standing firm while chaos raged around her. For millions, she wasn't just cross-examining Trump. She was voicing their anger, their hurt, their demand that the powerful be held to account. Trump's fury had backfired. Instead of silencing victims, it amplified them, and as the country leaned closer, hearts pounding with disbelief and grim solidarity, one question loomed larger than any headline, burning across screens and whispered in homes. Could this be the moment that finally unites America against corruption, arrogance, and the abuse of power? Trump straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie with a jerk of the wrist, trying to reclaim the stage that was slipping from his grasp. His voice rose, not in rage this time but in a rehearsed cadence, as if he were back at one of his rallies. "I helped the FBI," he declared, chest puffed, words crashing through the microphones. "I was no hindrance. I gave them everything they needed. More than anyone ever did. Ask them, they'll tell you. I was the reason Epstein was even watched in the first place." The sudden shift from fury to self-praise landed like a jolt, the chamber pausing for a beat before Republicans erupted in cheers, pounding their fists on desks as though his words had rescued him from the edge. The spectacle played out like theater for the cameras. His allies leaned forward, nodding, their voices rising. "That's right, and tell them, Mr. President." It was an orchestrated chorus, the kind of reflexive loyalty that turned fact into fog. For a moment, it looked like Trump had found his footing again, his grin stretching wide, arms outstretched as though he'd silence every critic with a single claim. The roar from his corner rattled the chamber, the smirk on his face daring Jasmine to try and knock it away. But outside the walls, the reaction was anything but united. Screens in diners, classrooms, factories replayed his declaration on loop, pundits scrambling to parse the claim. Social media lit up with skepticism. #Trump and FBI shot into trending, flooded with posts of disbelief. If he really helped, one viral tweet read, "Why did Epstein's empire continue unchecked for decades?" Experts piped into live broadcasts, their tones measured but cutting. "We have no record of Trump cooperating in any meaningful way. The FBI has never corroborated his supposed assistance." The contradiction between his boast and the documented silence festered in real time. Inside the hearing room, Jasmine tilted her head, eyes narrowing with something between pity and disdain. She didn't rush to respond. She let the cheer fade, let the adrenaline of his corner drain into uncomfortable quiet. Then she leaned forward, her voice calm, controlled, but edged like a razor. "You say you helped the FBI. Then why are there no reports, no testimony, no documents confirming it? Why has no agent stepped forward to thank you, to validate your claim? You call yourself a helper, Mr. Trump, but all I see is a man scrambling for a shield." The chamber hushed, the brief euphoria in Trump's camp faltering. The smirk on his lips twitched, his eyes narrowing as if searching for a retort. The silence pressed down like weight, every spectator sensing the fragility of his defense. Outside, the chants shifted once more, the rhythm of shame. Shame, rising again to drown out the orchestrated applause inside. The camera zoomed closer, capturing Trump's rigid smile and Jasmine's unflinching stare, two portraits of power colliding in real time. Across America, the question sparked in homes, on factory floors, in crowded subway cars. Was this really a defense, or just another deflection from a man running out of moves? Jasmine didn't move at first. She let Trump's triumphant grin linger just long enough to look like overconfidence, then leaned forward with a calmness that cut sharper than a shout. She lifted a sheet of testimony from the stack, the paper trembling not from her hand but from the electricity in the room. Her voice dropped into a measured rhythm, Every word deliberate, unflinching. Mr. Trump claims he helped the FBI. But I have here the deposition of your own Attorney General, Bill Barr. Under oath, Barr confirmed there was no evidence, none, that you were ever an informant, or that you provided substantial assistance in the Epstein investigation. The name alone landed like a grenade. Bill Barr wasn't a Democrat. He wasn't a partisan enemy, he was Trump's man. And now his sworn words, printed in black and white, sat on the record against the narrative Trump was trying to build. The chamber froze for a heartbeat, and then the uproar began. Reporters shouted questions over each other, cameras flashing so rapidly, it looked like lightning striking inside the room. Democrats leaned in with a collective murmur of satisfaction, while Republicans shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting toward the former president whose jaw had stiffened like stone. Trump's grin faltered, not fully gone, but cracked, the way glass does before it shatters. Then Jasmine didn't let the wave pass. She pulled up a second piece of evidence, this time a video clip viewed by staffers. The screen above the chamber flickered, showing House Speaker Mike Johnson from just days earlier, stammering in front of reporters. His face projected larger than life as he admitted he had misspoken when he suggested Trump acted as an FBI informant. Then Hunt's words replayed. I want to be clear. President Trump was never an informant. I used the wrong language. Gasps and whispers shot through the chamber like sparks racing across dry wood. Allies retreating, defenses collapsing, Trump shook his head violently, gripping the microphone. He walked it back because of pressure. Everyone knows he was forced. His voice cracked, the desperation straining at the edges, but the more he shouted, the weaker it sounded. Then Hunt cameras, unforgiving and merciless, captured every twitch, every bead of sweat, every flicker of panic in the eyes of a man whose allies were stepping away one by one. Jasmine's tone hardened, her words now laced with fire. When your own Attorney General under oath denies your story, when the Speaker of the House has to retract his defense of you, what's left, Mr. Trump? If even your allies can no longer carry the weight of your lies, then who will? Because the truth doesn't need defenders. Only lies do. The sentence cracked through the chamber like thunder, met with pounding desks from her colleagues and furious shouts from Trump's. Outside, the chants grew louder, splitting the sky into competing cries, one side screaming for accountability, the other clinging desperately to defiance. But for millions watching, the scene was clear. A man who had built his empire on loyalty was now watching that loyalty fracture in plain view. And as Trump sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting for rescue that wasn't coming, to question swept across America like a cold wine. When allies retreat, who will still defend him? Jasmine didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. She simply leaned into the microphone and let the silence stretch before she struck. Lies don't just corrode trust, Mr. Trump, she began, her tone cool and surgical. They carry a price tag that every American family is forced to pay. Do you remember Fox News? Do you remember their $787.5 million settlement for spreading your false election claims? That's $750 million gone. Money that could have gone to schools, to hospitals, to veterans. Instead, it was spent cleaning up after your lies. Her words detonated across the chamber like a controlled explosion, leaving the air vibrating with disbelief. Trump's hands twitched on the table, his lips pressed tight, the bravado slipping just slightly. For the first time, the camera caught his jaw working like a man grinding through panic. The smirk was gone. His supporters behind him shifted uncomfortably, their applause hesitant now, their eyes darting not with pride but with unease. The strongest fortress, his image of invincibility, suddenly showed cracks too visible to deny. Jasmine drove the point deeper. Every settlement, every court case, every scandal tied to your name bleeds into the pockets of ordinary people. The lies about Epstein, the lies about the election, the lies about your so-called innocence, they all cost us. They cost America its credibility. They cost us stability. They cost us trust in the very institutions meant to protect democracy. And still you sit here pretending you're the victim, Hunt. Her voice sliced through the chamber, each sentence sharper than the last, and the weight of the figures she invoked pressed down like chains around Trump's shoulders. The reaction outside the Capitol was immediate. Protesters who had been screaming chants now erupted into a different rhythm, a roar of "Pay it back, pay it back." Rolling through the crowd, bouncing off the stone steps and echoing into the hearing room itself. On social media, #Trump costs us skyrocketed. Timelines flooded with infographics tallying the real price of his falsehoods, the settlements, the legal fees, the wasted billions. The narrative wasn't abstract anymore. Jasmine had translated it into a debt every viewer could feel in their own wallets. Trump tried to interrupt, his voice breaking through the gavel's pounding. "That wasn't me. I didn't make Fox settle. They chose to do that. It was their weakness, not mine." The desperation in his tone betrayed him. The camera zoomed in, catching the faint tremor in his hand as he jabbed the air, the flicker in his eyes that betrayed the storm beneath the surface. For years he had leaned on bluster to mask fragility. But today, under Jasmine's relentless precision, the armor was thinning. Jasmine seized the silence that followed, her voice lowering into something almost prophetic. "You can deny signatures, you can deny photos, you can deny victims. But you cannot deny math. Numbers don't lie. And the numbers show that your lies are bankrupting not just yourself, but this entire country." The chamber sat stunned, the words hanging heavy in the air. Across America, people watching from break rooms and living rooms leaned forward, sensing the shift. The man who once projected the untouchable strength now looked smaller, weaker, exposed. The question rose not just from Jasmine's lips, but from millions of hearts at once. What happens when the strongest facade starts to crack, and the whole structure begins to crumble? The chamber was still humming with the weight of Jasmine's last blow when she raised her hand, signaling to the staffers at the projector. The lights dimmed, the screens flickered, and a grainy video began to play. The first image was unmistakable. Jeffrey Epstein, lounging in a leather chair, smirking as if he knew the lens was capturing more than his face. His voice rasped through the speakers, rough but clear. "Donald will never escape my book. He's mine forever. Written down, signed, locked in." The words hung in the air like a detonation. A wave of gasps tore across the chamber, aides covering their mouths, reporters lurching forward as though the truth itself had materialized in front of them. Even seasoned lawmakers shifted uneasily, their chairs creaking under the weight of disbelief. For a moment, it was as though the building itself held its breath, every corner vibrating with a new, dangerous reality. Trump's face drained of color, he shot to his feet, pointing furiously at the screen. "Fake. Fake video. Deep fake garbage." His voice cracked, fury colliding with panic, but the damage was already done. The video looped again, Epstein's smirk larger than life, his words replaying like a haunting refrain. "Donald will never escape my book." The repetition turned the chamber into an echo chamber of accusation, one that no denial could immediately smother. Outside, the shockwave rippled through the nation. In diners, construction sites, hospital waiting rooms, Americans froze, eyes glued to the sudden feed blasting across every major network. Social media ignited in seconds, hashtags detonating, #never escaped, #Epstein tape, #Trump book. Millions of fingers typed furiously, disbelief turning into outrage, outrage turning into something closer to reckoning. Commentators broke into live coverage mid-sentence, anchors stammering, analysts whispering that the hearing had just crossed into uncharted territory. Inside, the press gallery exploded with no's. Journalists sparked questions over each other, camera shutters firing like gunshots. When was this recorded? Who leaked it? Has it been authenticated? The chaos only magnified the tape's impact. Experts rushed onto live panels, some urging caution, others declaring the similarities to known Epstein footage undeniable. The ambiguity fueled the storm, making the moment more combustible with every passing second. Trump slammed his fist against the table, his words tumbling over themselves. "They doctored it. Everyone knows this. Epstein hated me. This is a setup, a pathetic hoax," but his voice lacked the booming resonance of defiance. Instead, it carried the brittle edge of a man watching his last barricades crumble in real time. His eyes darted to his allies for reinforcement, but their silence was louder than their loyalty. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice calm, deliberate, lethal. "You can call this fake, Mr. Trump. You can shout until your voice breaks. But the American people just heard Epstein's own words. Donald will never escape my book, and the more you deny, the more they will ask themselves, why does he sound so certain?" Her tone sliced through the uproar, turning silence into pressure, pressure into inevitability. The video replayed one last time, the smirk frozen on Epstein's face, the words etched into the national conscience. Across America, a single chilling question rose above the nose, gripping every viewer. Can one tape undo years of spin, tearing away the lies to reveal the truth beneath? The chamber had been roaring only moments earlier, but when the video cut to black, the air shifted into something far stranger: silence. Trump sat rigid in his chair, fists planted on the table, eyes fixed on nothing. His lips trembled as if searching for words, but none came. Cameras zoomed in, broadcasting his every twitch in merciless high definition. The man who had built a political empire on never stopping, never yielding, never shutting up, was suddenly wordless. Seconds ticked by. At first, people assumed he was pausing for effect, a dramatic pause to summon a comeback. But 5 seconds turned to 10, 10 to 20, and still, nothing. His chest rose and fell, his knuckles whitening against the woe, but the silence remained. Reporters in the gallery exchanged stunned glances, pens frozen midair. The gavel didn't strike, Jasmine didn't move, no one dared to. Every eye was locked on Trump as the silence grew heavier, thicker, suffocating. At 30 seconds, the disbelief spread to living rooms across America. In kitchens and factories, in bars and break rooms, people leaned closer to their screens, mouths falling open as they realized this wasn't a pause. This was a collapse. Anchors on live television stopped speaking mid-sentence, letting the dead air itself tell the story. Producers whispered frantically into earpieces, "Don't cut away, keep counting." At 45 seconds, Twitter erupted. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag Trump Silence 74. Hashtag Dead Air. Hashtag Silence Speaks. Clips of the frozen moment replayed instantly, users adding countdown timers in the corner of the video. "This is longer than Nixon's resignation speech," one viral tweet read. "This is longer than most Americans can hold their breath," wrote another. For a nation accustomed to Trump's endless stream of words, the silence was more deafening than any outburst he had ever delivered. At 60 seconds, the camera cut to Jasmine. She hadn't moved, her gaze fixed firmly on Trump, calm but unyielding. The image was stark. One woman steady and composed, one man unraveling in silence before the world. Commentators whispered it felt less like politics and more like a verdict unfolding in real time. Finally, at 74 seconds, Trump shifted, inhaled sharply, opened his mouth, and then closed it again. The silence had already branded itself into history, a moment no spin, no rally, no insult could erase. His empire had been built on no's, but today, the absence of words spoke louder than every rally chant combined. The gavel struck at last, jolting the chamber back into motion, but the damage was already done. Across America, millions sat in disbelief, replaying the frozen seconds that felt like an eternity. Silence had stripped away the bluster and left only the weight of truth pressing down on a man who had always talked his way out. And as screens flickered with his empty stare, the question reverberated across the nation like thunder rolling through a storm. What does silence say when words fail? And what does it reveal about the man who suddenly has nothing left to say? Across America, the 74 seconds of silence replayed on loop, etched into every feed, every screen, every conversation. In diners from Ohio to Nevada, televisions blared above the hum of coffee machines as patrons sat frozen, forks suspended midair. Some erupted in laughter, others shook their heads in disbelief, while a group of veterans at the back table muttered, "That was the sound of a man who finally ran out of excuses." The quiet that had filled the chamber was now a roar across the nation, outrage for some, vindication for others, relief for those who had waited years to see him falter. On the subway in New York, strangers who never spoke exchanged glances, heads shaking, phone screens replaying Jasmine's steady stare against Trump's blank face. In Houston, a church basement full of survivors and minority advocates upped dopily as the silence replayed. They didn't hear just dead air, they heard justice catching up. One community leader wiped her eyes and told the local news camera, when Jasmine spoke, she wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking for every girl who thought no one would believe her, for every community told to sit down and be quiet. Today, we saw what happens when truth refuses to bow. Social media surged with energy not felt in years. Hashtag TrumpSilence74 became the fastest trending hashtag of the year, followed by #CrockettTheVoice and #TruthOverPower. Videos of Jasmine's piercing words racked up tens of millions of views within hours. In comments, ordinary Americans flooded the threads with their own testimonies, stories of workplace harassment, systemic neglect, and the suffocating silence they'd endured. The hearing wasn't just a spectacle anymore. It was a mirror, reflecting pain and resilience back at a nation long divided. Cable news split screens showed streets from Atlanta to Chicago where crowds gathered spontaneously, chanting not party slogans, but one name: Jasmine. Jasmine, she was no longer just a lawmaker holding files. She had become a symbol, a vessel for rage, hope, and vindication. For minority communities, her composure and fire were proof that someone who looked like them, who had lived their struggles, could stand in the halls of power and speak without flinching. In barbershops, in classrooms, in union halls, people began to say, aloud, "She's our champion." And while Trump's defenders scrambled to spin the silence as strategy, America had already decided what it had witnessed. It wasn't strategy. It was surrender. The man who never stopped talking had finally been disarmed, not by no's but by truth. As night fell and the clips played on endless repeat, the country found itself asking a new question. One bigger than Trump, bigger than the hearing itself. Is Jasmine Crockett becoming the voice of the silenced, the leader who forces America to finally listen? The silence inside the chamber was shattered by chaos outside. On the Capitol steps, the crowd that had spent hours chanting broke into violence the moment the Epstein tape played on the jumbo screens. Fists flew, flags snapped like weapons, and the line of police buckled as protesters surged against barricades. Justice for victims clashed with Trump 2024. Until the words blurred into one guttural roar of rage. Smoke from flares choked the air, sirens wailed, and reporters broadcasting live ducked for cover as bottles shattered around them. The scene spiraled within minutes. Tear gas canisters arced overhead, exploding into plumes that stung eyes and burned throats. Protesters stumbled, coughed, and regrouped, some wrapping flags around their faces as improvised masks. Others hurled barricades back at the riot shields. The pavement shook under the weight of boots as the National Guard arrived, armored vehicles rolling onto Constitution Avenue, their engines growling like an omen. For Americans watching on screens across the country, the images were surreal. A city that was supposed to embody democracy now looked like a battlefield. The divide was no longer theoretical. It was physical, brutal, undeniable. Mothers pulled their children from the crowd, veterans clashed with young activists, and chants turned into screams as flashbangs lit the sky like a storm breaking at high noon. Each explosion echoed inside the hearing room, faint but unmistakable, a reminder that the fight wasn't contained to polished floors and microphones. It was spilling into the streets, threatening to tear the country apart in real time. And yet, amid the smoke and the fury, cameras caught moments of eerie clarity. A young woman holding a sign that read "Truth is not partisan," as she knelt in the haze. A veteran pulling a stranger to safety through the tear gas. A group of students chanting Jasmine's name as if clinging to a lifeline. These flashes of solidarity flickered like sparks in the storm, fragile but impossible to ignore. The Capitol dome loomed overhead, half shrouded in smoke, a haunting image of a nation caught between collapse and rebirth. Viewers across America sat frozen, not just watching history, but feeling it in their lungs, their throats, their bones. And one question pulsed through the chaos louder than any chant or explosion. Can truth heal a nation this fractured, or is the divide already too deep to mend? Through the haze of chaos outside, the chamber lights glared down on Jasmine as she rose slowly to her feet. The noise from the streets, the sirens, the chants, the explosions of flashbangs, rattled the windows, threatening to drown out everything inside. Yet when she leaned into the microphone, her voice cut through with a calm clarity that silenced even her loudest opponents. "Justice doesn't belong to parties," she said, her tone measured but fierce. "It belongs to people." The words struck differently, and the accusations, louder than the statistics. They weren't an attack, they were a lifeline thrown to a country on the verge of ripping itself apart. Cameras zoomed in, capturing not just her expression, but the steady fire in her eyes. She spoke of her roots, her voice carrying the weight of streets and courtrooms far from the marble walls of Congress. "I didn't come here to serve the powerful. I came here because I've stood with the voiceless, the forgotten, the ones crushed by a system that looked the other way. I came here because I know what it feels like to be told your pain doesn't matter. And I refuse to let that continue, not in this chamber, not in this country. For a moment, the protests outside seemed to pause. The chants softened, the crowd shifting as if listening through the smoke. In living rooms and subway cars, people leaned closer to their screens, not to hear her dismantle another lie but to hear her summon something deeper. Empathy, resolve, dignity. The image of a woman standing alone, surrounded by fury yet unshaken, rippled across the nation like a new kind of shockwave, not one of scandal, but of hope. Even some Republicans shifted uneasily, their eyes lowering as Jasmine's words filled the hall. It was no longer about red versus blue, about who scored points in a hearing. She reframed it into something far more dangerous for Trump, a moral battlefield where he had nothing left to offer. Her final words landed like a challenge etched into stone. The measure of leadership isn't how loud you shout or how many follow blindly. It's how you serve those with the least to give you back. The chamber sat in weighted silence, the nation holding its breath. Across America, millions asked themselves the same thing as her image burned across their screens. Is this the leadership America longs for? A voice not for the powerful, but for the people who have always been silenced. Trump's face twisted, his voice dropping to a snarl that cut through the chamber like a blade. He leaned into the microphone, spitting each word as though venom would make them sting harder. You're nothing, Crockett, nothing. The insult hung heavy, a final attempt to belittle, to reduce her presence in front of millions. His allies pounded their fists on desks in approval, desperate to breathe life into his collapsing image. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She rose from her chair with the steadiness of someone who had faced worse insults her entire life. Her gaze locked onto Trump, unshaken, unwavering. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't just loud. It was resonant, carrying the weight of a nation that had been waiting for someone to answer back. I may be nothing to you, she declared, her words slicing through the air, but to millions, I am their voice, and I will not be silenced. The chamber exploded. Democrats erupted in cheers, some pounding their desks, others standing with fists raised. Even the press gallery couldn't hold back gasps, their cameras flashing like lightning to capture the confrontation. Outside, the chants shifted, the crowd roaring Jasmine's name, her words already echoing across social media feeds, clipped, shared, and elevated into history within minutes. Trump sat back, his face pale beneath the orange hue of lights, his mouth working but no words coming. For the first time, he looked less like a fighter and more like a relic, a man watching his dominance slip away in real time. Jasmine, meanwhile, stood tall, her silhouette framed by the banners on the wall, her defiance transfigured into triumph. Across America, viewers leaned forward, hearts pounding, asking themselves what they were really witnessing. Was this simply a heated exchange in a hearing, or was it something far greater? The moment a new figure stepped out of the shadows of partisanship and into the role of national champion. The question loomed larger than the chamber itself, searing into the conscience of every viewer. Is this the birth of a new national leader? The hearing ended, but the storm had only just begun. By evening, every major network was locked in frantic coverage, pundits dissecting Trump's 74 seconds of silence, Jasmine's cutting rebukes, and the photo of the $22,500 joke. On conservative outlets, commentators insisted the video was doctored, the silence a strategic pause, the outrage manufactured by Democrats. On progressive networks, analysts called it the moment Trump finally broke, a collapse that exposed him as vulnerable for the first time in years. The split screen became the new reality. Two Americas, watching the same images, but seeing entirely different truths. In diners and living rooms, however, the effect was undeniable. Trump's base scrambled to defend him, repeating talking points about witch hunts and fake evidence, but their voices trembled with less conviction than before. Independents, who had long tuned out the no's, were shaken. Not by the accusations alone, but by the silence, the cracks in a man once thought uncheckable, and progressives, they were electrified. Jasmine's name trended alongside #TrumpSilent74, not just as a congresswoman, but as a figure many were already calling the future face of accountability in American politics. The country pulsed with questions, the lines between loyalty and doubt blurring in real time. Was this the moment that fractured Trump's grip on his supporters, or merely another chapter in the endless cycle of outrage and defense? Could one hearing shift the very foundation of an election year, or would the spectacle dissolve into partisan fog as it had so many times before? Across America, screens flickered late into the night as citizens argued, whispered, and wondered. And one question loomed, burning hotter than any headline: will this change votes, or just opinions? The chamber emptied under the weight of history, cameras still flashing, reporters still shouting, but Jasmine Crockett didn't linger in the spotlight. She walked out of the Capitol not toward the waiting microphones, but into the crowd of ordinary Americans who had gathered in the shadow of the dome. The smoke of protests still lingered in the air, sirens wailed in the distance, but in this pocket of chaos, she reached for something quieter, something human. She stopped first at the hands of janitors who had been sweeping shattered glass from the marble steps, their uniforms stained with dust and sweat. She shook their hands firmly, thanking them by name, her voice carrying warmth even after hours of battle inside. Nurses in scrubs, still smelling faintly of antiseptic, pushed forward to meet her, some with tears streaking their cheeks. Jasmine embraced them without hesitation, whispering, "This fight is for you, too." Veterans, their medals clinking softly against worn jackets, saluted her. She didn't return the salute. She grasped their hands, grounding their gesture in solidarity rather than ceremony. The cameras followed, but for once, the spectacle wasn't for politics, it was something truer, raw. A woman battered by confrontation, yet pausing to honor the very people whose struggles had carried her into that chamber. Over the footage, the narration rolled like a hymn. A warrior is not measured by enemies defeated, but by lives defended. The line resonated, less as commentary and more as an epitaph for the moment, a reminder of what leadership should mean. America watched, hearts heavy but lifted, as Jasmine walked past the barricades, no longer just a politician in a fight with Trump, but a figure of service. And the question whispered across the nation was as old as democracy itself. What defines true power? Dominance or service? The cameras found her again as she reached the base of the Capitol steps. "If justice is silenced, democracy dies," she said, her words slicing through the chaos like a blade. The crowd hushed for a moment, as though the sentence itself demanded stillness. "Will you stand silent or rise with me?" The challenge wasn't rhetorical. It was visceral, a call pressed into the hearts of millions who had felt powerless, urging them to choose between complicity and courage. The energy outside shifted. Some shouted her name, others raised fists, while chants of "Rise, rise" began to pulse through the throng, spreading like wildfire. Social media ignited instantly, timelines flooding with clips of her words, captions screaming, "She said what no one else dared." The nose of partisanship seemed, for a rare moment, to give way to something larger, a demand for accountability, for dignity, for truth. Her face filled every screen, sweat and exhaustion visible, but so was the steel in her voice. It wasn't the sound of a politician angling for headlines. It was the cry of a fighter who had endured the venom of power and refused to yield. The hearing was over, but the reckoning had only begun. And as America leaned closer, the closing question burned into the night, heavier than any verdict. Is this country ready for leaders who put truth above power? Or will silence bury us all? When truth collides with denial, silence becomes louder than any speech. Jasmine's stand reminds us that courage is not about shouting the loudest, but about standing firm when the weight of power presses hardest. In our own lives, we face moments where lies, injustice, or fear tempt us into silence. Yet change only comes when someone dares to speak, not for themselves, but for those who cannot. True leadership begins with service, with defending what is right even when it costs us comfort. So, when your moment comes, will you stay silent, or will you rise to be someone's voice? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.